Show of hands, who has used CLI 3 specifically? So, oh, good, a lot of people. So my goal today is to make sure that everyone's at least learned something. Because there's so much in CLI 3, the documentation is pretty deep and long. So like it's, there's definitely something there that you probably don't know about. So if after this talk you haven't learned anything at all, please come afterwards and let me know, because I'd like to continue to modify this presentation in the future. Why Vue CLI 3? So when they went from CLI 2 to 3, there were a number of things that they wanted to accomplish, and that required a full rewrite of the CLI tool. So one of those things was to remove as much as possible the need for developers to understand all the detailed inner workings of how a project is built with Webpack and how things are bundled and a lot of those details. And so this idea of zero configuration is the result of that. When you're building a project, you don't actually see Webpack config anymore. You can if you have to. But for the most part, it's anything that you do in CLI 3 is pretty much, the Webpack is pretty much invisible to you. So that's actually a good thing because they've gone out of their way to make sure that everything works. And as updates come and they add new features, they've sort of locked that ecosystem up so that you can't do too much damage. I feel like in the past, with CLI 2, it was very easy to add a feature or do something different and your project would break. So I feel like it's been a lot more stable in general. So another thing was enforcing best practices. It was very easy with CLI 2 to install a bunch of random plugins that really weren't meant to be a part of the Vue ecosystem. And again, your project would break, or you wouldn't know all of the millions of different options that are available. You don't really understand what many of them do or how it should be done. And so it was usually a lot of trial and error or a lot of reading. So with CLI 3, they've made sure that when you install a plugin that's part of the ecosystem, the best practices are already enabled by default. So that means it is a lot more, what's the word? Like they're trying to enforce that their idea of what a good app is, which is sort of a new mantra. But for the most part, it's worked pretty well.
See what I got them.
So by default, when you install, when you create a Vue CLI app, you get these default features without actually needing to do anything else. So there are command line options where you can add features to the product. But even if you choose absolutely nothing additional, you're going to get this stuff by default and use it however you like. So with Webpack, there's a pre-configured Webpack that's going to be ready to go. It's easy to use, and you get a bunch of stuff out of the box already configured for you, such as hot module reload, tree shaking, caching. You're going to see hashes when you're doing builds, and so all of that's like ready to go and done. ES 2017 transpilation is involved, using the latest and greatest JavaScript syntax usually requires installing polyfills and doing some extra setup that you're probably always going to do because it's something you really want to do. Things like object spread operator or async await. Those are things that we want to be using all the time. So again, that's built in. There's no configuration required. And then with post CSS. So even if you don't choose a CSS preprocessor like Sass or less, Post CSS is actually completely integrated into CLI. So things like the auto prefixer, CSS modules in a Vue file, all of that stuff is already there, even though you didn't really need it. So again, that's a nice to have. The auto-generated HTML, again, that will for every entry point, you're not going to have to worry about how assets are being injected into your HTML file. And they've included Lodash for templating. So you can continue to modify your HTML pretty easily. There's also these environment modes and variables, and we did have those in the past, but I feel like they've been a lot easier to use in CLI 3. Basically, every project will have a development, production, and a test mode, and anywhere inside of the entire Vue app, both during the build process and during the client-side rendering process, you have access to those variables. Excuse me. And in addition to that, it also includes the ability to have globally scoped variables throughout that process as well. Basically, object key value pairs. Modern mode's kind of interesting. I haven't messed too much with this yet, but I'm definitely going to be now that I've learned about it. So when you're doing your Vue build, you can have this -- modern option. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to create two completely different sets of bundling. One of them is going to be meant for the latest and greatest browsers that support ES modules. And it's going to write out your tags in a way so that those latest and greatest browsers will only use those JavaScript files. And then they're written out in a way so that for those browsers that don't support ES modules, those tags will be ignored, and it'll use a legacy bundle. And so when you're doing your Vue build with -- modern, both of these are being built in parallel, and it's all just done for you. So as far as I've been able to tell, I haven't had any problems with it, and it's a pretty nice to have. The quote that Evan Yu gave when CLI came out was that the Hello World app was 16% smaller and obviously more performant by using the modern ES modules. And then multiple pages. So doing multiple entry points, like having different pages and building them separately in CLI 2X was pretty difficult. In my opinion, it required a lot of Webpack knowledge. Now you basically have a pages key in your configuration, your Vue config file. And in that key, you can say which HTML files you want to build and what bundles need to be on each of those. So you could have a home page that has certain files, and then some of those files are shared on other entry points, and some of them aren't. So you're increasing the performance for pages when you're not overloading your JavaScript and CSS on every page. There's a lot of control involved there. Build targets are pretty interesting. So there's when you're doing Vue build, there's a -- target. And what it allows you to do is basically modify that project's that entry point to be built in a completely different way. In our case at Politico, we've started a design system that Jack spearheaded, and it's going quite well. And so basically that project is building a component library that we're able to inject, and it uses this build targets. So in addition to those default features, again, you have to do nothing at all to have those. You have optional features that are available when you're creating your project. So for all of you that have used this before, you've probably seen these options before. And these can also be added afterwards. And so we'll be getting into that a little bit later. The one that I wanted to note that somebody else had noted as well as they came in was PWA. I feel like that's a really powerful plugin. It basically will include information about all the icons and everything that you need when a user is installing your web page as on your mobile app, on your mobile device. And it includes service workers that have extra caching involved, so that like if the device goes offline, like you can control how your app is cached. And so a lot of that is like really built in really well. I think there was a PWA in CLI 2, but this one's been really well developed. And then obviously more. And so we're going to be going over a lot of these throughout this presentation. You have presets, which used to be called templates. And you have a full, there's a new plugin API that's extensible by developers. So developers can create their own plugins, which we're actually going to do today as well. The GUI is really cool. So if you do Vue UI, it's actually itself a Vue app, and it will run on your system in a browser. It's browser-based, and you can, using that, you have a full UI to create and manage your projects on your system. And prototyping is one that some people don't know about. Basically, they've included on the command line the ability to instantly prototype a single file component. So if you just have this one component and you want to test it out or modify it a little bit and check it out on its own without having installed any packages or initializing an npm package, you can view that component. And then when you're done, like whatever temporary storage it gets thrown into is gone. So it's a nice, really quick way to instantly prototype something from the command line. And I guarantee we're going to see a lot of really cool tools coming from this. One of them was presented at VueConf in New Orleans, and there were lots of oohs and ahs and fireworks, and it was pretty cool, which I don't think we've seen yet in production.
Oh,
the Pine Move.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah.
It's not in production yet?
But yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, he hasn't finished it.
I hope he hurries.
So I included these two slides here on adoption rate. This is the NPM registry analytics, which there's some controversy behind this in terms of how it works, which I won't get into. But I still find it interesting as just sort of an overall graph of where things are, especially with a project as big as Vue. You know, there's a lot of people installing it, so you kind of get a general sense of the momentum. And so with 2x, you can see the graph is pretty static. This is from January 18 to October 18. It's pretty static, if not going down a little bit. And you see that odd spike around June. That was when CLI 3 was released. And you can see just over just these 6 months, not only has it been steadily increasing, but has easily overpassed 2x installations. So again, this isn't super accurate, but it is a good notion that CLI 3 is ready for production. People are using it. There's no reason not to, in my opinion. So installation is pretty easy. Everyone who's already done it. You do have to globally install the @vue CLI package. And the @vue scope is of note. So this is a new thing as of CLI 3, I believe. And so anytime you see something scoped to that, it's a plugin that is being developed by the core team and not by just some random Joe Schmo. So it's a good indication that what you're installing probably works and is probably going to be working well. Yeah. So creating a project, Vue create my project. So this, from whatever folder you're in, it will create a My Project folder, and it'll place all of your Vue code in there. And they immediately give you this nice sort of helper command line prompt system. The default there is there by default, but in this case, you can see I'm choosing manually select features, and it continues. And here I'm using my arrow keys and hitting space to select some of these individual features that we saw on that first slide. And as you choose each of those features, you get further command prompts. So in this case, you can see the linter installation. They have some options for some different configurations. And then you get all the way down to the end, and you can actually save that preset just as you could in CLI 2 as something that you can then use later on. So when I run Vue create my project a second time, you can see that linting in Sass that I had just saved is available there at the top. So these presets are saved on your system, and if you don't even want to bother with Vue create my project, you can actually include the -p option and just name it, and you won't get any prompt at all. The Vue UI is also a way to create projects, but you can do so much more with it as well. And I definitely wanted to demo this for you. If you haven't seen it already, who has not seen Vue UI yet? Awesome. You're going to be shocked. So you can run this from anywhere on your system. Does not matter where it is. Oh, geez. They put it on this tab. All right, and so the default view is showing me projects that I've already imported into the Vue UI, but I can just very easily click Create. You get your full file system here. Create new project. Give it a name. So what's already really cool about this is compared to the command line, you're able to do everything that you could do on the command line and vice versa. But the difference is you're given this really nice contextual information on each of the features. It's also showing you some things that may have actually been sort of hidden. For instance, the package manager will use, I believe, Yarn by default if you have it, or npm if you don't. But in order to change this using the command line, you have to use a different option during the creation, the Vue create. I think it's like package manager -- package manager is npm or package manager is Yarn. Whereas with the UI, you're able to see it here visually. So I'll leave all this alone. And you can see these are pretty much the same options that we saw before. Same thing here, pretty much the same options. But again, like this contextual information is just awesome, right? Like I don't know what TypeScript is. I'm a robot. And it will take you out and you can get plenty of information about all these different features that are installable. So I'll choose CSS preprocessors. And then we're given further options. I'll choose SAS, standard config. We have lint on save. I'll do lint and fix on commit. Hit create, continue. That last pop-up was, do I want to save the preset? So you're given this, nice UI with scroll bars and everything. In the background, at the terminal, you can see what it's doing. Linking dependencies. All right, while that's building, because it might take a while, I'm going to represent. All right, and we'll just move on while that's building. I just want to talk briefly about the project structure after a project is built. In this case, I've pretty much installed everything that's available to me. So first, the public folder. Here we have the PWA is installed in this case, and so it has all those icons that I was talking about. So this is what's used when you say, I want to save my web app to my mobile device. So those placeholders are there for you. Our entry point, index.html. Manifest.json is at the root always of an app like this, and it will link to those web app icons, and it also has, I think it links to the service worker, and it also has options to change your theme colors for your web app icon. And then obviously robots controlling the crawlers. When we go to the source folder, we have our assets folder, which by default will be optimized. What that means is there are certain rules in play. I think it's like if you have an asset that is of a certain size, it will actually inline it for a more performant app. So things like that you really don't have to think about. And then we have our single file components with JavaScript. In this case, TypeScript was used, so you see .ts instead of .js. We have our service worker, which again is coming from PWA. Router and Vuex are here. TypeScript shims. And then in our test folders, we have both Cypress and Jest for end-to-end and unit testing. And then in the root, there are a number of files here that are super useful, and again, things you don't have to think about too much. Browsers list is telling Babel and auto prefixer which browsers you want to target for polyfills. So those polyfills will automatically be included. You don't have to think about it. This is a preset. You can see it's at vue/app. So what they do a lot of in CLI is they will pull in something that's been done really, really well, and then they'll slightly modify it for the Vue ecosystem to include all those best practices that I was talking about. So this is where you'll find things like the async await, the object rest spread operator. Auto prefixer, again, is included by default, even if you didn't have Sass or less. And we have our TypeScript configuration. Let's see if this is done. It is. There we go. So after going back to our Vue UI, after the project's been built, again, we have this gorgeous UI that's showing us all sorts of useful contextual information. These are the installed plugins. We have dependencies. So you'd see these in your package.json. And then the configuration is really cool because it gives you basically, again, settings that you're going to want to think about. And so as you modify these and save it, it's going to be modifying those config files that we just looked at in that root source folder. Same thing with ESLint. ESLint is particularly powerful. You have some of the stuff that we had at the beginning, but they've literally listed out every single one of the special Vue, the Vue linting. And for each of these, you can choose how you want it to be made.
That's really nice.
Mm-hmm. And you can see they also have links to each one of them, just in case you don't know what it is. But yeah, I found this really useful. And then the last tab is the commands that are available in our package JSON. For instance, I can run the serve task. So this would be the same as if I'm on the command line, I just do npm run serve or yarn serve. But again, what's nice is they're giving you these little graphs and some information about your app after it's been built. So this is just serve. This isn't build. So I would now let's see. Where's the link? Is it this guy? No. Oh, open app. There it is. Right. So if I open app, it takes me straight to it. The standard Vue.js template. But what's cool about this is, yeah, it's showing like the size of your assets, some speed statistics based on their size. You can see I'm getting like a little warning symbol here, even with this default application. The reason is because this isn't a build, right? This is a serve, so there's a lot of like stuff that's not optimized right now. You can like switch out the stats. It's just like there's so much here, right, that you wouldn't normally have thought you really needed until you see it, and then you realize you do. And then outputs showing me the terminal. But if I stop this task, right, and then go to, let's say, build, run this, you'll see that it's quite different. So one thing to note while this is compiling, as I mentioned before, there's a full plugin API system. There's also a full plugin API system separately for Vue UI. And as you install other plugins, you'll notice that some people who are building these are actually starting to build their own dashboards. One really cool one I definitely recommend checking out is Apollo's. It's really well thought out. But yeah, so you can see that little warning icon is gone now because this is a fully built project and everything's nice and small. Definitely a lot smaller than it was in 2x. Remember, this is a project that's pretty heavy. So yeah. Right, so I'm going to kill this.
Is it pretty easy to use Vue UI to reconfigure existing projects that you may have created?
Man, great question. That's what I wanted to show you. Yeah, so if you go back to this home button, any project that you've had here is here. So it could be a project built in a completely different way, right? Using the command line tool or whatever. And I can then I can import it and bring it in and then start to modify it from there. So yeah, it's pretty slick.
How does that work with Webpack though? I mean, like you're talking about bringing something in from
3.
Vue CLI
I
2?
I think it requires CLI 3, but
I was gonna say,
'Cause
yeah, that's a good question.
that-
I don't know.
Yeah, okay, because to say.
otherwise, they're gonna have to interrogate a whole bunch of files they don't control.
Oh yeah, totally. I'm looking for my water. Jack, can you give me water? Thanks. Little funny handy thing that was added recently. I thought this was cool. Oh no, what I wanted to show you now that when you mentioned it is adding how easy it is to add stuff. So like if I click this add plugin, so any plugin that is labeled in a very specific way is going to show up here. So even if you make your own plugin, what you'll notice is a lot of them have vue-cli-plugin, and that's all that's required. As long as you have that as the root of your name, it will actually show up and be findable right here with this interface. You can see there's a ton. So with any one of these, I could just click in and then install it. So pretty cool to get your code out there and have it be discoverable. All right. Let's move forward. So we looked at develop. Linting is exactly what you think it is. I've found that linting in CLI 3 is really, 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 really good. We've set up a pretty hefty lint file, and it works 100% of the time. People will give us the most random, crappy code, and it always fires really well.
When you say linting's really good, which lint are you talking
Oh,
about?
well, we're using ESLint with Prettier right now.
Okay. So
We
there's
have
a lot of linters.
Yeah, we have a separate project that's using TypeScript now, and it has TSLint. Jack would have to speak to that, but I guess I haven't really delved into that yet. But yeah, it's been good, really, really good. Yes. Oh, thanks, man. Really? Where is it?
In a cup.
Oh,
There in the cup.
did he bring this? Did he bring this? This isn't my water. Thank you, though. There, he's coming. Here he goes. I don't know whose this is. I had a thermos, and I just don't see it. It's weird. But anyway. Okay, anyway. So testing, yeah. So this is just showing like the different commands that are available. I don't know what this is. What is it?
Probably yours.
It wasn't. So behind the scenes, if you just look at the package JSON, you'll see that each one of these commands are just shortcuts for this Vue CLI service, which is sort of the root of how Vue works. I won't get too deep into that right now. And then when you're done, when you do your build, you're going to get a handy dandy dist folder, and you know it's a static app, so all you have to do is copy that out to your server, and you're done. And let's just look at that real quick. So if we look at the project that we just built, you can see our nice minified index.html. And you can see all this chunking that I was talking about. So I didn't even use the modern switch with this. What you'll see is that these are included slightly different when you do the modern option. But the hashing is in here, which is a random, just a random key that will be different every time you do a build, and it's very well laid out. We have our JS image. You can see the image even got a hash as well. All right. So let's talk about vue config. It's the only file that I didn't mention in our folder structure, and that's because it's not there. You have to create it. Again, the idea here is zero configuration for most people. Most people will never have to touch this file. We had to touch it pretty quickly because we did need to do some stuff with it. But what you can do is you can run vue inspect and SD out it to an output, and then view that Webpack config is what it basically is. You can't actually use that file at that point. It's not a Webpack ready file, but it gives you the information you need in order to modify it using this vue.config file. And then this is a list of all the different things that are available to you. We use a lot of these actually. Base URL, output directory, assets directory. These are all things that we use. Dev server is particularly important. I think I have a slide on that. Yeah. So this is actually this is a true to life Vue config we're using in-house right now. I've modified a few things, but basically what this is doing with the dev server key is if you have, we have a lot of projects where there's a back end and a front end, right? So like because Vue is static, and so while you are developing, this will make sure that your Vue app is running at port 8080, and then we have our backend app running at 8083. And so anytime I do any sort of request at /API, it's going to talk to the backend automatically.
You can also do this in the CLI. I mean, in the UI.
Oh, can you?
Yeah.
Oh, see, I didn't even know
UI
that.
too.
There's so much cool stuff in the UI.
Yeah.
It's all hidden there.
Which is also nice because it gives you all the options up front. What you
Right.
need to do, so.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Hey, Chris, we got a question.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry,
Yeah, no problem.
yell out loud. So why is it that there's no config.js? Is it that all of this stuff is like already built in? Like,
The Webpack config.
yeah.
Mhm. So the reason is so they've gone out of their way to when a Vue project is built, the stuff that's in Webpack config is not just being used by Webpack anymore. It's actually being used by all sorts of places inside of your source. And so if you went in and did all kinds of random modifications, that might be stuff that Vue CLI is not built for, right? So there's a con to that, right? Because you can't do that. But they've given you, with this Vue config in the next couple slides, they've given you all the abilities to do the same things that you would do with Webpack config, but doing it in the Vue CLI way. And it's the same syntax. But by having it in this Vue config file, you're able to use it throughout the entire Vue app rather than just Webpack, right? So a good example is the base URL, for instance. If you wanted to change base URL on CLI2, you would go into the Webpack config, right? You would change it there. Well, this is a variable that's now being used not only in Webpack, but across the entire app itself, right? So it makes more sense to have a different configuration file that Webpack is reading from. Yeah, good question. So yeah, like I said, there's a con there in that I don't know about you guys, but like I invested a lot of time learning Webpack, and I was telling him earlier that like I don't miss it. I really don't. Like this is so much easier to understand, in my opinion. But yeah, so in terms of modifying the Webpack config, so this is our Vue config file, and just including some random Webpack plugin, right? So you would just import it and do the exact same thing that you would do before, just a different key.
One time I was actually a couple of weeks ago I was Dockerizing the front end with the Vue CLI, and I couldn't get it to work at all. And it so happens that the CLI does not produce the config file, so it took me like 5 hours.
Oh,
to
right.
figure out
Like,
that
where
you
is
have to
this?
Build the actual config file
Right.
in order to make it run on the Docker container.
Right. Interesting.
So, that was a pain.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that would be messed up. So this was Configure Webpack. It has its own write methodology, and then there's Chain Webpack, which is using Webpack Chain, which is a pretty common methodology to do this. And so this is modifying one of the plugins that's already installed, right, by default, and changing where you want your index.html template to be found from, right? So it's still just as easy, quote quote easy, as it was before. I think this is simpler overall. The view inspect rule. So when you do view inspect, you're going to get this massive output of your Webpack config, right? If I just do view inspect, I'm in the wrong folder. Right, so from the root, I just do view inspect, and it just outputs it. But if I do this instead, where there's all kinds of different ways to inspect it. There's docs on this, but yeah, if I do view inspect rule HTML, it's just going to give me the key, or it's not. Oh, is it rules maybe? Shoot, I may have written this down wrong. There it is. That's not right either. I'd have to look at the docs. I must have written it down wrong. But yeah, like you're able to just get the key and see how it's currently configured, basically, so that you know what to modify. You can see the output here. Pretty cool. Like yeah, like they've included like comments as well. I think this. I saw a ticket about this, a GitHub ticket about this. Yeah. Oh, what else? So in terms of adding a plugin, we saw how easy it was in the Vue UI already, which probably should have come after this. But yeah, just to just re-say that it's as long as you have this CLI-plugin dash, right? It's just there's a shortcut for it, which is kind of nice. So as you can see, this is Vue add. It's not npm install, right? So why not just do npm install? Well, you can. You could totally just install it. It will show, if you did save dev here, show up in your package.json. It would be included as a node module. But what you'll find is the difference between Vue add and npm install. You can see on the left we did Vue add, on the right we did npm install, and we have that ESLint.js file, right? Package managers can't do this, right? And so the special syntax here, this Vue add, is actually a shortcut for both npm installing and running a new command called vue invoke. And what vue invoke is going to do is it's going to use that plugin API we've been talking about. So you can write files, JavaScript files that will modify your project and do things that weren't possible by npm alone. Or at least it heavily simplifies it. So I'm just noting here that this is a scoped package to add Vue, right? We know this is an official plugin. I can't really ever modify that, but even if you have your own plugin, it can be simply done. This Vue add Apollo is just going to do the same thing. So if you can add plugins, obviously you can remove them, right? Not quite. So this is a little bit of a gotcha. It's definitely worth knowing. This is an open issue currently on GitHub just 4 days ago. So the problem is, I've talked about invoke and how invoke will modify your project. It can do all kinds of things, and we're going to see that at the end of this. So when you add that, and then you have your project in a current state, you might go into your configuration files and keep modifying code, right? Like you might keep changing some of your configs. You might add another plugin, change a little bit more. There's nothing in this plugin API that says is keeping track of all of those changes, right? What we're talking about is basically a simulated Git built into the plugin API, and they're not ready to write something like that. So the current recommendation, I love this. He's just like, okay. The current recommendation is basically always commit before you add a plugin, and then always commit after you've added a plugin. And that gives you that Git history so that if you ever did want to remove the plugin, which you may, you would npm uninstall and then go back and cherry pick out that history. So this is really important because you're going to find plugins that do very significant things to your project. And you don't really want to go back and create a brand new project and move all your files over. Like that could be a pain in the butt. So just something worth noting, like even though you have that nice discoverability with all these plugins, like if you go in and start adding tons of plugins, like you might get in danger. So we're going to create a plugin from scratch. There are a number of files that are involved in this. The only one here that is absolutely required is index.js. I personally, having done this, I like having a preset.json. It's not required, but it allows you to define some of the basic steps involved in when your plugin is instantiated. So we're going to go through this basically one step at a time. So again, just to reiterate, the idea here is that you have a plugin, it's in Vue's ecosystem, it's findable by people, and in this particular case that I'm going to show you, it's a brand new project that's never been built before, rather than adding it afterwards. And what you'll find is that you can have both. You can have, with using these files, you can both have it at the beginning when you're first creating the project, and you can also add it later on, and it can do the same modifications. Yes.
When you create a custom plugin, do you have to do the custom config.js as well?
Um,
Or does this depend on what you're
Correct. Yeah. So like all of these files are not required. This is going to be a package. We're going to be putting these into a brand new package, right? And then we're going to instantiate a project based on this package, right? So these aren't all required, but I wanted to show you some of the different power that this has, basically. Yeah. So going back to when we were first creating projects earlier, we were able to use our system preset. So one of the first steps that's sort of involved in making this preset more readily available as part of a plugin is we can go grab it. So we know that this is on our system. So if I just do vue.rc, there. Code. Right, so you can see we have our linting and Sass saved preset. And so I can now, basically I could save this entire key value this object out to a brand new file if I wanted to. And then I could then use that JSON file to create my project. So I could give this to anybody without having ever built a package or anything like that. And they would have all the settings that I used when I first created it. And it goes a little bit further. You can do remote presets now. This is another good example of using somebody else's code and using it well. This is based on this download get repo package that's out there. And so basically, if you have a Git project and you put that preset as named preset.json into the root of that GitHub project, you can run this command and it will remotely pull that preset. Just another note here. We have had issues with this using our private Bitbucket server. It's probably that it's nailed down in certain ways. It might be how ports are being issued out. I don't know. But it definitely does not work for us at the moment. All of these other things do. I've tested all of these. But I actually started an issue on the Vue GitHub about it, and hoping that they figure this out because it's something we really definitely want to use. And then the other thing to note is this -- clone. So anytime you have a private repository that requires a login, so it's using this username. So in my case, it's Guirreri, and then the / is the repository name. And it's using my SSH key that's installed on my system in order to log me into that and have access to that. But anytime you have a private repository, you have to include the -- clone. My assumption is it's probably literally cloning the project to temporary storage someplace and then copying the file off. So I'm sure there's valid reasons for that in terms of security. But this works, and it works really well. I think it's really cool. All right, so we're going to create a preset. We're going to grab that vue.rc, and we're going to copy it to the root of our package. All right, so I'm going to make a directory here. We're going to call it Vue CLI plugin because we need that terminology. Call this vdc init. Go into it. And I'm just going to do npm init. Default options are fine. Yes. All right. So I needed that. All right. So here's our package .json, and all I'm going to do is create a new file. We call it preset.json. These file names are important in this case with plugins. And I'm going to copy this, just throw it in here, hit save. And now, if I cd up, if I do vue create -p, and I'm just pointing at the folder. I'm not actually pointing at the preset file itself, and then the name of our project. So it's going to see that preset there. It's going to use it and create the project based on the settings that are here. So you can already see sort of the power here. I have access to this, right? These are plugins that are being installed into the project, and I can do anything I want, pretty much anything I want here. The one thing I can't do, so what I'm showing you today is local development, right? Because in the end, we want this to be an npm package that's literally on the registry, and you're using that to create your project, right? So I don't want to mess around with that, because that's obviously a terrible workflow. We're going to be doing it all locally. So the one thing I can't do is include this local package here. But normally, if you did have it out on the registry, it would be just as simple as saying like this, udc init, and that will automatically grab my plugin as part of the initialization process. So we can't do this at the moment because it's not out there. And if you think about it, like if I have any problems as I'm developing, I'd have to republish every time in order to make sure that it's working properly. But we do have a methodology of doing this locally, and that's what I'm going to show you. But yeah, so you can see this project was made, and it has all of the dependencies that were in that preset. All right, let's see what the next slide is. Right, so we did this. I'm not going to run serve. You know what it looks like. So continuing to create a plugin, we're going to need this index.js file as part of our plugin. It's absolutely required when you're building one. And so index.js is going to be the methodology to modify the Webpack config when the project, when you run something in the project. So it's kind of odd that this is required just to create a brand new project, but we have to do it anyway. And we're actually just going to keep it empty because I don't want to dig into this just yet. So I'm just going to copy this over. So in our package folder, I just created an index.js, and we have this modules export. And so this API is what's going to be used later on to do these things that I've been talking about with the Webpack config. Now, just so that we can actually see something, I do want to modify the generator.js file. And so generator.js can modify the contents and configurations of the project file. Not only, in this case, it's not being done when you're running something. It's being done on both create and devote. According to the docs, it will only run on Vue create if your plugin is included with your preset.json, as I showed you earlier. But what I've found is if the preset.json is in the root, the same package as your plugin, it will actually run on Vue create, but it won't add the package automatically. So it's a little odd. I would recommend probably having that npm registry key in there just to make sure that it works properly. But I found that kind of odd. But anyway, what we're going to do is I'm going to take this sort of initialization for a generator. I'm going to create a new generator.js. And so you're going to see the same thing, module exports. This one's taking in also a completely separate API. It's a generator API to do, as I was saying, modify files of our plugin. And then options is what's going to be really interesting that I'm going to show you. So if we just put a console log here, generator is running, and we're going to look at that options object. Okay. So as I said before, when we created our project, this npm package that's local was not installed right with the project. So the first thing we need to do is add it. And we can do that now. So I'm going to do yarn add because I use yarn. Go up a folder. I'm doing this the wrong spot. Sorry. There we go. Yarn add. So this is the same as npm install. And we're going to point to our plugin. So this would be the same as if it was on an npm registry. And that's it. So this sees that it is a package, even though it's just local. And it's added it as a dependency. So if we look at the package JSON in our project, you'll see that it's being included here with our local file syntax. So this works. Again, this is not ideal, right? You would never release something like this. You would have to get your package onto a registry before you did something like this. But it's really nice for development because all I have to do in order to see my changes is re-add and then do the next step, which is yarn invoke, vue invoke. So I'm going to vue invoke, and it's vue CLI plugin vue.dc-init. So this is what this is doing is it's looking at the node modules folder where we've installed the plugin, and it's running these files that we've been modifying in our plugin. And you can see right off the bat that it's done something. Actually, it hasn't. I think this is just showing, yeah, the modified files in general. But here's our console log that we had in our plugin. So we know that it's working now. So one thing I could show you actually right now, remember we're logging this options. The options is actually coming from a couple places, but mainly it's coming from the command line prompt. So if I re-invoke this again, actually, what am I doing? And then I just add an option here, like it can be anything I want. What am I doing? Right? So that didn't work. Oh my gosh. Is it? My brain is fried. There it is. Yep. So you can see it's showed up here. And so what that means is that what we're doing at the command line is passing through this generator. It's also passing in through these other files that we're going to be using here in a second. All right.
What was root option?
Root option is, I believe, part of Vue Create. I think it's part of Vue Create. It's a good question. I can't remember off the top of my head, unfortunately. So we talked about this, how to add, and then how to invoke. And then as we're developing, we just re-add and re-invoke every time we change something. So the first thing I want to show you where we're actually doing something is in this generator. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to grab my code that I've already done. Get rid of this. So here's our generator. And I'm going to paste this in. So we're looking at the API, which is a generator API. This is documented on the CLI docs. And the render function, so what this is doing is it's looking at a folder inside of our plugin called template, which we're going to create here in a second. And as you can see, a copy and render. So anything that's in this folder is going to be copied when the creation process, or invoke, when invoke is fired. Any of these files are going to be copied. Render is the key word here, though, and this is something I haven't been able to do too well yet. So if anyone knows how to use this, please let me know after the presentation. But basically, there's a YAML templating system, and you can modify files using YAML that are already created or are part of Vue's built-in initialization. So I'm not going to show you this today because honestly, the few times I've tried it, I haven't been able to get it to work. But I am going to show you this copy. So the idea here is that we're going to create some files inside of our plugin, so that when the project is created, when the plugin is invoked, those files are going to be used. So we create a template folder, and this is essentially the root of the project. So what I want to do is I want to modify the app.vue. So we're going to create another folder source, create a new file, app.vue. And I'm going to get my app.vue to use a new file that we're creating. So that's going to go into the components folder. Is it component or components? Source, components. We're going to call that hello vue.dc.vue. And just for the sake of time, let's just grab the stuff so I don't have to type it all out. So this is the original app.vue, but we've added an import for our component. We've added it to our template, and we've added it to our components, right? Save that. And our hello vue.dc component. So this is pretty simple. It's just printing out some text. Actually, let's make this title, right? Because we have a titles prop, title prop. And then in here, yeah, so that should be set up right. Save. I always forget to save these. Save this. All right, so everything's saved. Does this make sense so far? Everybody's following? Okay, because this is cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to re-add. So it's grabbing that package, copying it over to our node modules. And then we're going to re-invoke. And you can see it's copied the file over. It's also modified our app.vue. And so now if I do yarn serve, and wait. Uh, 80. Right, you can see our components in here. It's pretty cool, right? I think this is really cool. I don't know.
Are you guys primarily using those as scaffold?
Exactly. So yeah, we're able to basically be scaffolding an entire project that is then completely reusable. But it gets better. Not done yet.
Is there some safeguard to make sure that if you import a plugin into your project that has a bunch of configuration changes made, it's not going to overwrite anything?
Yeah. So that's where that render stuff comes from. Like I said, it's templating. So definitely check out the docs on it. You can basically have regex inside of that YAML template, and you can say, if this exists, then change it. But if it doesn't, like, it won't do anything at all. Yeah. Because I ran into that problem immediately. I was like, I don't want it to overwrite every time. Like, I want to modify it and then still be able to invoke the plugin. So yeah, all that's in there. I just haven't figured it out yet. So the last thing we're going to do is with this prompts. So prompts.js is going to be a part of that. It's a prompt API, right? And you've seen during Vue Create, we have all these pretty prompts and everything. We can actually use that same JavaScript inside of our plugin. And it's based on this inquire.js. So again, another great usage of somebody else's code and bringing it into the Vue ecosystem. So all we have to do is create a prompts.js file. And all we have to do is grab code that I've already written. It's kind of nice. All right, so in this case, what prompts.js is doing is it's exporting an array of options, of questions, right? So these are questions. The name is what you would use in the command line. The type, there's all kinds of different types that Inquire.js provides you with. You've seen a couple different ones with Vue Create, right? Like where you can use spacebar to select different options, and then based on those options, it does further options. In this case, it's just yes or no. Then you give a message, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be modifying our ESLint based on a prompt, and then you can give it a default value. So what I want to do is actually, let's just immediately test this and make sure it works. So we add again. And invoke. And here's our prompt. So it's saying, do you want to force order it? I hit yes. And you can see in the generator, we have that option coming in as true. So now inside of our generator, remember we have all this power in generator. we're able to modify that based on this option. So let's do that as our last go.
Was that dynamic at one point?
Is it dynamic at one
In
point?
your prompts, yes. Your config name was named dynamic at one point?
No.
Okay.
No.
Just wondering why the backticks.
Oh, why they named it that way? You
No,
mean?
why
Oh.
the backticks? If you're not using it.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, because I did have it dynamic at one point. Yes,
Okay.
sorry. Thank you. Sorry. I wasn't following you. All right. So this is going to go into our generator. We still want to do the render. All right. So what we're doing here is we have a default ESLint config object. We know that this object has rules. This is just stuff you would just know, but you can find in the docs. And we're checking to see if the option that we've brought in is true or false. If it's true, we add to our rules array. And then we have this function extend package. And in this case, I've added a dependency, a new dependency, which this is going to go straight into our package.json. And we've added ESLint config. So you're probably wondering, why are you adding ESLint config to your package.json? Well, this is something that Vue sort of does internally. Basically, when I created my project, I told it to give me, one of the options is make all my configurations into individual configuration files, right? But in reality, all of those can actually be, if you said no, they would all be in your package.json file. And so the smartness here is that even though I've said make sure they're in individual configuration files, it's still clearly internally building everything into package.json first, and then it's using that command line option that I had used way back when to make sure that it gets put into my ESLint config that's external. I hope this makes sense, but we're going to re-add. While that's running, I just want to show you the ESLint. So the ESLint, currently, these are the rules that are in here by default. All right, so re-add, re-invoke. I get my option, yes or no. I hit yes. You can see it's installing Axios, additional dependencies. Blah 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 blah. Doing some extra work, and you can already see the modification. So this new Vue rule is now in here based on my command line option. If I go to here and we look at the syntax, I purposely wrote this wrong, and you can see the lint is showing up saying the order of the items in this component are incorrect. And we didn't look at lint earlier, but if I just do yarn lint, wow, it's done. I love linting; it's so cool. So that's full circle. If like I said, one other thing to mention here is that that switch. So what was the command? It was this guy. So if I do this, it will automatically be, I believe, true. Yeah, so it's automatically true without giving me any prompt. So if the switch exists, it won't give you any prompt at all, and you can just do it all from the command line. But that's about it. Any questions?
We have 8:15 right now, and we want to make sure that people can get out on time. So we have a good 15 minutes for questions, though. So if anyone has anything for Chris after that.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot. Yes.
So you mentioned when you're creating a project with CLI 3, there's a lot of stuff that's out of the box, and one of the optional things is the rapid prototyping feature. How does that differ from something that's provided by, say, Storybook?
Well, yeah. So the instant prototyping is just meant to be. I mean, we could look at the docs, but I think it's like, I don't even remember the command line. But you basically can have just a single .vue file that you've written, very, very simple, just like I've been showing you with these. And just from that command line, it could be anywhere on your system, like anywhere at all. It will, yeah. So it will initiate a project temporarily just to show you that component in a browser so that you can see it running. And then when you Control C out of it, all those temporary files just get deleted.
So it's nothing that you want to keep.
Exactly. Yeah. It just gives you a way to immediately see something.
Got it.
Yep. Yes.
Have you run into anything that having access to the Webpack files linking back to Vue CLI 2 you could have fixed that you can't or couldn't fix?
No.
So it's all been
Easy answer. Yeah. Like, honestly, I wanted to like dig into the Webpack stuff more, but I feel like the default Webpack config that they've given you is already great. Like,
It is. It's
like-
really
like
good.
one of the first things I would always do with CLI 2 is, God, I need hot module reload. Like, I have to have that. I can't live without it.
Yeah, it's default.
It's like the very first thing you would do is go in there, and it's already there. Yeah. So like all of the things that object spread operator, async await, all these things that I've mentioned in here are all things I would always install in CLI 2, and they're just there. So yeah, no, I really haven't had, like, I actually searched the web today for like a solid period of time looking for a really good example of this is something you have to do afterwards. And the best I could come up with is that one shot of the Vue config where we have dev server, right? That's definitely needed to be configured, but that's not something they can give you by default. You know, you don't know what the ports are going to be. So yeah, I struggled to come up with something because it's good. It's very well thought out.
Do you know how they're giving you the Babel config? Because there's a number of ways that you can set up Babel to accomplish sometimes the almost exact same thing.
The only thing I know is that the polyfills, as far as I understand it, so I haven't really dug into this too much, so I don't know everything about it. But from what I've been reading, they are installed automatically. Like it will. So if you do something that's not currently polyfilled, that polyfill will automatically be included. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that's right.
Well, Babel provides one that is sort of automatic as you need it. It'll polyfill for you. I assume they're leveraging that. But
Yes. Yeah. I would assume.
There's a lot of different ways to kind of arrive at the same place. So I just wondered if how they were.
Yeah,
doing that under the covers.
There's a reason why like the second bullet point was best practices. Like I truly believe that they are like I keep looking for things where I'm like, this is so wrong, I'm gonna have to completely redo it, and I haven't really found it. So yeah, I feel like they've probably done it right. There's so many people involved community-wise too. If you go on GitHub and you look at the chatter on the issues and everything, you'll see people are coming up with real problems that they are having and that other people are having as well. And Evan Yu is on it every time. Like, I swear to God, like Evan Yu, Chris Fritz, all the core team, there's always somebody there that's like, well, this is the reason why we did this. And something else I didn't really touch on is that they will always include references. Like, it'll be some article from 2012 where some guy like came up with the most brilliant scheme ever, and they're using that information, like they're taking people's knowledge into play. So I believe in that, I guess. Why rewrite the wheel if you don't have to? You know, why make it complicated? Any other questions? No. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. Please visit us on Discord. Oh, please.
Yeah.
Jack, do the outro.
Thank you very much.